The kingdom of Urindor had always been a land of whispered secrets. Mist rolled over its mountains like silent guardians, and the forest held shadows that seemed alive. At the very edge of the northern borders, beyond the roads traveled by merchants and knights, stood a lonely tower. It was ancient, crumbling, and overgrown with vines. The villagers spoke of it only in hushed tones, for it was the home of Lyra, the cursed Omega. Lyra moved through the forest with a grace that seemed almost unreal, her silver hair brushing against the ferns, her eyes reflecting the faint light of the pale winter sun. She did not speak to anyone, she had not in years. The villagers believed that even a glance from her could bring ruin. Livestock fell ill, crops failed, and storms struck without warning when someone ventured too close. Legends said her curse was a punishment from the old gods for an ancestor who had betrayed them in days long past. Lyra had learned to live with the weight of her own presence. She did not want friends, did not want love, and certainly did not want attention. Yet despite her solitude, she tended the forest as if it were a garden. Animals came to her without fear, and even the shadows seemed to bow to her quiet power. In her heart, though, a loneliness lingered, a longing she refused to name. Far to the south, in the grand capital of Urindor, a different kind of power held sway. King Kalen, the Alpha King, sat upon a throne carved from dark stone. His kingdom prospered, but not without enemies. Rivals within the court whispered of treachery, while the neighboring lands watched for weakness. Kalen's life had been forged in battles of both steel and wit, and his reputation as a strong, decisive ruler spread far beyond the mountains. Yet even he felt the gnawing emptiness that came from ruling alone. It was the stories of Lyra that reached him first, tales of a cursed Omega who lived in the northern tower, feared by all. Most would have dismissed it as superstition, but Kalen did not. He sensed that the story hid something more, something dangerous, yes, but also intriguing. He had never met fear that could not be tamed, nor power that refused to bend. And something in him stirred at the thought of her, curiosity, caution, and a strange, inexplicable pull toward the one whom everyone else shunned. The journey north was treacherous. Kalen rode under gray skies, through forests that seemed to whisper in the wind, over cliffs and streams that tested even his sure-footed horse. He had brought only a small escort, for he wanted no distractions. His mind was focused entirely on the one who had haunted his thoughts since the first tale reached his ears. When the tower finally came into view, Kalen felt a chill that had nothing to do with the cold wind. The structure was taller than it looked from the village, its stones blackened with age, its windows narrow and dark. Around it, the forest grew wilder, as if nature itself guarded her sanctuary. Kalen dismounted, the snow crunching under his boots. He walked toward the tower, unafraid, though every instinct in him whispered caution. Lyra sensed him long before he reached the door. From a window high above, she watched a figure moving through the trees, tall, strong, with the air of someone who did not belong to the fear that surrounded her. Her heart beat faster, though she tried to steady it. Strangers came, often foolish, sometimes cruel. They rarely lasted long. Kalen knocked once, a deliberate sound that echoed through the empty tower. Lyra did not answer. She waited, her eyes narrowing. The next knock was louder, more insistent. Finally, she descended the spiral stairs, her bare feet silent against the cold stone. When she opened the door, she did not speak. Kalen studied her carefully. She was slender, her frame delicate, yet held a quiet strength that seemed to radiate from within. Her eyes were sharp, guarded, and her lips pressed into a thin line. She looked like someone who had been waiting a long time for this moment, yet was unsure if it would be the end or the beginning of something far darker. "I am Kalen," he said, his voice calm but commanding. "I have come because the stories are true. You are not what they say, are you?" Lyra tilted her head. "Most stories are lies," she replied softly, her voice like wind through dead leaves. "But some are warnings." Kalen's gaze did not waver. "I am not afraid," he said. "Nor do I believe you are a danger, at least not in the way the villagers think." Lyra studied him carefully. He was different from the others, that much was clear. Most who came spoke of fear or tried to bargain with the power they did not understand. Kalen did not. Instead, there was something in his eyes that mirrored her own loneliness, a determination that stirred something she had long suppressed, curiosity. "I do not welcome visitors," she said finally. "Leave now, and you may yet escape unharmed." Kalen smiled faintly. "I do not leave what I do not understand, and I intend to understand you." For a moment, silence stretched between them, heavy and fragile. Then, without warning, the air around Lyra shimmered. Shadows rose from the stone floor, curling around her like living smoke. Kalen felt a sudden pressure, as if the wind itself had turned against him. He did not step back. He did not falter. Instead, he moved closer, raising a hand slowly, not to strike, but to reach out. Lyra recoiled, her eyes wide. No one touches me," she whispered, voice trembling. Kalen stopped just short of her, his hand hovering in the space between them. "Then I will not," he said softly, "but I will stand here beside you and face whatever comes." The shadows surged violently. The tower walls shook, dust falling in thin clouds. A scream tore through the air, neither his nor hers, but the sound of the curse itself, angry, wild, and alive. Lyra stumbled backward, her hand pressed to her chest. The wind tore through the tower, howling as if the forest outside had come alive. Kalen remained where he was, his hand still raised, calm amidst the chaos. He could feel the raw force of her power, the danger it carried, and the fear that bound it. And yet, beneath it all, he sensed something fragile, a heart that longed for connection, even if it would not admit it. For the first time in years, Lyra felt fear, not of the world or the curse, but of something unfamiliar, the thought of letting someone in. Her chest tightened as she realized that he had not flinched, had not run. He had stood there, fearless, even as the very walls of her sanctuary trembled. Then, just as suddenly as it began, the storm within the tower subsided. Shadows receded, curling back into the corners, leaving the room quiet and cold. Lyra looked at Kalen, her eyes wide, her lips parted in disbelief. "How?" she whispered. Kalen lowered his hands slowly. "I told you," he said. "I am not afraid." Lyra shook her head, a mix of awe and panic in her gaze. You could have been hurt." "Yes," Kalen said, finishing for her. "But so could you, and yet here we are, alive. I will not leave, Lyra, not now, not ever, if I can help it." Her breath caught. She had lived with fear for so long that hope seemed almost dangerous. But in his words, there was a promise she could not deny, a warmth that seeped into her frozen heart. Before either of them could speak further, a sudden crack echoed through the tower, louder than thunder. The stones beneath their feet shifted. Dust filled the air. Lyra instinctively threw up her hands, and a shadow shot from her fingers like a living whip, striking the ground. The tower groaned. Kalen's eyes met hers. "The curse," he said softly, voice tight with concern. "It is stronger than I imagined." Lyra swallowed hard. Her hand trembled, and for the first time she realized that the stories were only half the truth. The curse was not just her burden, it was alive, and it would fight anyone who dared come close. Kalen took a careful step forward. "Then we face it together," he said, voice low, steady, commanding. "Whatever comes, we face it together." Lyra's heart pounded, a mixture of fear and something dangerously like longing. She had always been alone, untouchable, untamed. And yet she did not pull away. The ground shook again, more violently this time, and dust filled the air like a blinding storm. The shadows of the tower twisted and writhed, and Lyra felt a surge of power unlike anything before. She gasped, raising her hands to control it, to contain it, but the curse would not be tamed so easily. Kalen's hand hovered near hers once more. "Trust me," he said, a whisper that seemed to cut through the chaos. Lyra hesitated, then slowly, almost imperceptibly, let her fingers brush against his. The moment they touched, the shadows around her recoiled, hissing like angry spirits. The tower shook violently, but Kalen held firm, his gaze locked onto hers. For the first time in years, Lyra felt the warmth of another soul. Not fear, not anger, not pity, but something stronger, something unyielding. And deep within her, buried under years of isolation, a spark of hope flickered. The tower trembled, the shadows writhed, and outside the forest seemed to hold its breath. Lyra and Kalen stood together, hand in hand, as if daring the world itself to break them apart. And in that moment, neither knew what the future held, only that the storm was far from over. Cliffhanger. A low, rumbling growl echoed from the deepest shadows of the tower. Lyra's eyes widened as a dark, shapeless figure rose from the floor, eyes glowing like molten gold. The curse was awakening, and the Alpha King's hand remained in hers. The forest around the northern tower lay still after the storm, as if it too were catching its breath. Snow drifted softly along the path, dusting the broken stones and fallen branches, leaving a quiet calm that belied the chaos that had just occurred. Kalen led Lyra through the remnants of the tower, his hand firm around hers. Her fingers were cold, trembling slightly, but she did not pull away. The strange warmth that had flared in her chest when their hands touched remained, stubborn and undeniable. "You are stronger than I imagined," Kaelin said softly, not breaking stride. "And yet this power, it frightens you as much as it frightens others." Lyra kept her gaze downward. "It is not fear," she said, voice low, almost a whisper. "It is caution. Those who come near me, they are hurt. I have seen it too many times to forget." Kaelin's eyes softened, the edge of authority giving way to something gentler. "Then I will not let anyone hurt you. Not while I am near. I promised you that, did I not?" She said nothing. Words seemed fragile, inadequate to the weight of the moment. Instead, she simply allowed him to guide her through the ruins of the tower. Their journey southward toward Kaelin's castle was quiet, each lost in thought. The forest around them was thick with frost and mist, and even the animals kept their distance, sensing the strange combination of danger and protection that clung to Lyra. By nightfall, they reached the gates of the castle, a towering fortress of black stone and silver banners that gleamed in the moonlight. Kaelin's escort had prepared rooms in advance, but Lyra refused to sleep anywhere other than the quietest tower, far from the eyes of curious courtiers. She moved through the corridors with caution, every shadow a potential threat, every whisper a warning. Kaelin, however, moved beside her with a calm certainty that made her feel both safe and unnervingly exposed. Inside the castle, whispers followed her like a shadow. Servants and guards alike had heard of the cursed Omega, and even in the flickering torchlight, eyes lingered on her with fear, curiosity, and fascination. Lyra ignored them as best she could, though the tension tightened in her chest with every glance. Kaelin observed it all, silent and steady, his presence a protective shield. "Ignore them," he said when he noticed her flinch at a group of servants. "They are not important. Only what we do and what we face together matters." Lyra's lips pressed into a thin line, a mixture of gratitude and doubt. She had lived her life avoiding all connection, believing her power a curse that could not coexist with anyone else. Yet here was Kaelin, an alpha king, fearless and unwavering, moving as if her presence were not a danger but a challenge he was willing to embrace. The days that followed were tense and careful. Lyra explored the castle at her own pace, moving through the moonlit halls and secret gardens. She discovered quiet courtyards where the snow had not yet melted, fountains that whispered with flowing water, and libraries stacked with books that smelled of time and dust. Kaelin often found her there, reading silently or watching the sky, and each time their gazes met, full of unspoken words. Their conversations were measured, each word chosen with care. Kaelin asked about her life in the tower, her visions, and the origins of her curse. Lyra answered in fragments, revealing just enough to intrigue him but never enough to make herself fully vulnerable. "You have endured more than most could bear," Kaelin said one evening, standing by a window as snow swirled around the castle. "And yet, you remain unbroken." "That is not weakness, Lyra, that is strength." Lyra looked at him, surprised by the weight of the truth in his voice. "Strength is not always enough," she murmured. "Sometimes it brings only more pain." Kaelin turned to her, his eyes holding a mix of understanding and quiet insistence. "Pain is not the enemy. Fear is not the enemy. They are part of what makes you you, and I will not let them take you from yourself." Despite her reservations, Lyra felt a flutter of something unfamiliar. Hope. She had long believed she would live and die alone, her life defined by the curse. But Kaelin's words stirred something deep within her, a desire to believe that connection could exist without destruction. One night, under the silver light of a full moon, Lyra ventured into the castle garden. Snow covered the ground in thick layers, sparkling like crushed diamonds. She wandered along the frozen fountains, letting the cold air clear her thoughts. Kaelin appeared behind her, silent as the wind, his shadow falling across the path. "You should not wander alone," he said softly. "I like the quiet," she replied, her voice barely above a whisper. "It reminds me that I am still myself, even here." Kaelin stepped closer, his breath visible in the frosty air. "You are yourself even in the storm, Lyra." But storms are easier to face together. Their hands brushed and Lyra flinched. She did not pull away, though, and Kaelin's eyes held hers, steady and unwavering. "Do you trust me?" he asked. Lyra hesitated. Trust was not a word she used lightly. I am trying," she admitted. Kaelin smiled faintly, as if he understood more than she could say. "That is all I ask." The calm did not last. From the shadows of the garden, a low, menacing growl rumbled. Lyra's eyes widened as she felt the familiar tug of the curse, raw, chaotic, and hungry. She lifted her hands instinctively, and snow swirled violently around them, whipped by a force she could barely control. Kalen stepped in front of her without hesitation. "Lyra," he said, his voice firm, "focus, not on fear, on control. I am here." Her fingers trembled, sparks of shadow leaping like living flames from her hands. The air around them thickened, heavy with the weight of power. Lyra felt the curse pushing, testing, and for a moment she feared she would lose control entirely. Then Kalen reached for her hand again. "Together," he said, and when their fingers touched, the chaos paused, as if acknowledging the bond between them. Lyra's chest heaved, and for the first time the curse's roar felt more like a challenge than a threat. "You are different," Lyra whispered, her eyes searching his. No one else has faced me like this." Kalen's gaze softened. "Because I do not see you as a threat. I see you as someone worth standing beside, no matter the danger." The moonlight caught the edge of their hands as they remained joined, and Lyra felt an unfamiliar warmth spread through her, countering the chill of the snow. For the first time in years, she did not feel entirely alone. Yet the night was far from over. From the edge of the garden, a shadow moved, something darker and more deliberate than the wind. Lyra felt a cold prickle along her spine as the presence drew nearer. The curse reacted instantly, flaring around her in jagged bursts of shadow and snow. Kalen gripped her hand tighter. "Stay close," he commanded, and together they faced the darkness. The shadow hesitated, then lunged, a mass of black that shifted and twisted. Lyra raised her hands instinctively, and the power within her responded, coiling around the intruder like a living serpent. Kalen stepped forward, calm and resolute, lending her strength not with force but with presence. Together they pushed back the shadow, and for a moment it seemed they had won. Lyra's chest heaved, exhaustion and adrenaline mingling as the night air filled her lungs. But the shadow did not retreat fully. It circled, watching, waiting, and then vanished into the mist, leaving only the echo of its growl behind. Lyra sank to her knees in the snow, her hands trembling. Kalen knelt beside her, brushing the cold frost from her hair. "It is not gone," he said softly, "but we have faced it together. That matters." Lyra looked at him, her eyes wide with a mix of fear and gratitude. You are not afraid," she murmured. "I am," Kalen admitted, "of losing you, but not of you, not ever." For the first time, Lyra allowed herself a small, tentative smile. She did not know what the future held, or if she could truly trust the bond forming between them. But in that moment, with snow drifting around them and the stars gleaming above, she understood something she had never allowed herself to hope. Maybe, just maybe, she was not alone. The night deepened, and the castle remained quiet, but the forest beyond whispered with hidden dangers. Lyra and Kalen stood together, hand in hand, facing not only the shadows outside but the storms within themselves. Cliffhanger, as they returned to the castle, a distant horn echoed across the mountains, sharp and commanding. Lyra froze, sensing a force approaching, one that would test not only her power but the fragile bond growing between her and the Alpha King. Something dark and relentless was coming, and this time they could not face it alone. The castle of Urindor was alive with whispers. Courtiers spoke in hushed tones of the cursed Omega who had come to live within its walls. Some were fascinated, others fearful, and a few saw an opportunity in Lyra's presence, a weapon to use against the Alpha King. But Kalen paid little attention to the rumors. His focus remained on her. Lyra moved cautiously through the grand halls, her eyes always alert. Even in the castle, she could sense the subtle tension, the unease that lingered in the air. The shadows seemed to shift as if alive, echoing the uncertainty in her own heart. Yet, wherever Kalen was, she felt a strange reassurance, as if his presence grounded her, even in the midst of the unknown. Kalen had arranged for her to have her own chamber in the quietest tower of the castle. It overlooked the northern forest, where snow still blanketed the ground and the trees swayed gently in the cold wind. Lyra spent hours staring out the window, watching the forest, feeling the pulse of the land, and sensing the magic that lingered in the air. One evening, Kalen entered her chamber quietly, as he often did, and stood by the window, looking at the forest below. "You seem restless," he said, his voice calm but attentive. Lyra shook her head. "I am not restless. I am aware," she replied. "The curse does not sleep even here. It watches, it waits." Kalen stepped closer, his eyes searching hers, And do you wish to face it alone? Lyra looked away, biting her lip. I do not know, she admitted. I fear what it could do if I let it take control. I have lived with this fear my whole life. Kaelin reached out, brushing a strand of silver hair from her face. Fear is not weakness, he said softly. It is a reminder of what matters, and I matter, Lyra. I am here. I will not leave. For a moment, Lyra allowed herself to believe him. She felt the warmth of his hand, the quiet strength in his voice, and a flutter of hope she had not dared to feel in years. But just as quickly, doubt returned. Could she allow herself to trust someone? Could she risk her heart, knowing the curse could destroy everything she held dear? The days passed in a tense rhythm of careful exploration, training, and quiet companionship. Kaelin insisted on teaching her to control her power, guiding her to focus on the energy within her rather than letting it lash out unpredictably. He did not command, he encouraged. He did not push, he supported. And in this delicate balance, Lyra began to feel a bond forming, a fragile, dangerous connection that frightened her as much as it thrilled her. One night, Kaelin led her to the castle's ancient library, a vast hall filled with tomes and scrolls that smelled of old parchment and magic. The firelight flickered against the stone walls, casting long shadows that danced across the shelves. There is knowledge here that may help you understand the curse, Kaelin said, his hand resting lightly on the edge of a table. It is tied not only to your bloodline but to an artifact hidden beneath the castle, a relic older than the kingdom itself. Lyra's eyes widened. A relic, could it be the source of the curse? Kaelin nodded slowly. It is possible, but we will not know until we face it, and we will face it together. The thought of delving into the depths of the castle, of confronting something ancient and powerful, sent a shiver down Lyra's spine. Yet, alongside the fear was a strange thrill, the possibility of understanding, of control, and of choosing her own destiny for the first time. Over the next several days, they prepared. Lyra practiced channeling her power, learning to shape it, to contain it, and to direct it. Kaelin trained beside her, not with weapons this time, but with focus, patience, and guidance. Their hands brushed often, sometimes intentionally, sometimes by accident, and each time Lyra felt a jolt, a mixture of fear, longing, and something dangerously tender. Their bond deepened in quiet, stolen moments. A shared glance across the hall, a brush of hands while reading, a whisper of reassurance in the moonlit garden. Lyra found herself thinking of him even when he was not near, feeling a warmth she had never known, a longing she could neither name nor deny. But their growing closeness did not go unnoticed. One evening, as they prepared to descend into the catacombs beneath the castle, a messenger arrived, a young knight, pale and trembling. "My king," he said, bowing low, "the northern lords gather against you. They know of the Omega in your castle, and they intend to strike to take her or destroy her." Kaelin's jaw tightened. "So it begins," he muttered. He turned to Lyra, eyes dark and fierce. "You must trust me. Whatever comes, I will protect you, but this fight will not be easy. You must be ready to face more than just the curse." Lyra swallowed hard, fear and determination warring within her. I will do what I must," she said quietly, "but I cannot do it alone." "You will not," Kaelin said firmly, taking her hand. "Not while I stand with you." Not ever. The catacombs beneath the castle were cold and dark, their walls etched with runes that pulsed faintly with ancient magic. Torches flickered, casting dancing shadows that seemed to watch their every move. Lyra's senses were heightened. Every whisper of wind, every movement in the darkness set her nerves on edge. Kaelin led the way, calm and steady, as if the darkness itself feared him. Lyra followed closely, her power coiled within her, ready to strike if needed. She had learned to trust him, to rely on his presence as both anchor and shield. Yet a small part of her remained uncertain, aware that the curse had a will of its own, and that its influence might reach even here, deep beneath the castle. They reached a vast chamber, the heart of the catacombs. At its center lay a pedestal, and upon it, a relic, a black crystal pulsing with a faint, eerie light. The air around it shimmered with raw energy, and Lyra felt her pulse quicken. This was the source of her curse, the object that had bound her power and her destiny for so long. Kaelin stepped beside her, his hand brushing hers. "Are you ready?" he asked, voice low and steady. Lyra nodded, drawing a deep breath. "I am." Together they approached the relic. The moment Lyra's fingers brushed its surface, the shadows in the chamber surged violently. The relic seemed alive, feeding on fear, anger, and despair. Lyra struggled to contain her power, and Kaelin's presence anchored her, steadying her as the room trembled. "You are stronger than it believes," Kaelin said, his voice firm in the chaos. "Do not let it control you. You are not the curse. You are yourself." Lyra's heart pounded. For years, she had believed she was the curse, that her very existence brought harm. But with Kaelin beside her, she felt something she had never felt before: hope. She focused on the warmth of his hand, the certainty in his voice, and the unyielding strength in his presence. With a surge of will, she channeled her energy, shaping it, controlling it, directing it toward the relic. The shadows recoiled, twisting and writhing, until with a final pulse, the relic shattered, its energy dispersing in a cascade of light. Lyra stumbled, exhausted, but Kaelin caught her. "You did it," he said, his voice filled with awe and pride. For the first time in her life, Lyra felt free. The curse no longer bound her, no longer threatened to destroy those around her. She looked up at Kaelin, gratitude and something deeper shining in her eyes. I could not have done it without you," she whispered. Kaelin smiled faintly, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "You did it because you are stronger than you know. I only helped you see it." Their eyes met, and in that moment the bond between them deepened, not just as king and cursed Omega, but as two souls who had faced fear, darkness, and their own hearts together. But the castle above was not yet safe. The northern lords were gathering, their forces moving like shadows across the mountains. Lyra and Kaelin had won one battle, but the war for the kingdom, and for their lives, was far from over. As they ascended from the catacombs, hand in hand, Lyra realized something she had never believed possible. She could face the world not alone, but with someone she trusted, someone she cared for, someone who had chosen to stand with her against the darkness. The storm outside raged, snow whipping against the castle walls, but inside there was a spark of warmth, a promise of something new. A future built not on fear, but on trust, courage, and a bond that neither curse nor enemy could break. Cliffhanger, from the highest tower a shadow moved, tall, dark, and deliberate. The northern lords were not the only threat. A figure emerged from the mist, cloaked in black, eyes glowing with unnatural light. Kaelin and Lyra would have to face not only armies, but an enemy that seemed to know their every move, and the shadow whispered a single, chilling word: "Omega!" The wind howled through the towers of Urendor, carrying with it the scent of snow, iron, and impending danger. The northern lords had gathered their forces at the borders, but Kaelin knew the true threat was far more sinister. From the mist, the shadowy figure had emerged, powerful, deliberate, and unlike any enemy they had faced before. Lyra stood beside Kaelin on the highest battlement, her silver hair whipping in the wind. She had grown stronger, more confident since shattering the relic in the catacombs. Her power no longer terrified her, it pulsed through her with purpose. Yet even now her heart thudded with fear. This shadow was unlike any she had faced. It seemed to know her deepest fears, the doubts she had carried since childhood. Kaelin placed a firm hand on her shoulder. "We face this together," he said, his voice steady. "No matter what comes, I will not leave your side." Lyra nodded, drawing a deep breath. "Together," she echoed. The shadow descended from the mist like a living storm. Its eyes glowed a golden hue, and it radiated power that made the very air shimmer. Lyra could feel it probing her mind, teasing out the memories of her curse, the pain of her isolation, the loneliness she had carried for so long. "You are the Omega," the shadow whispered, voice like grinding stone. "Bound by fear, by blood, by magic, you belong to me." Lyra's chest tightened. For a moment, doubt flickered. What if the shadow was right? What if her strength, her bond with Kaelin, her courage, were not enough? Kaelin stepped forward, placing himself between her and the dark figure. "You are no one's property," he said, voice ringing with authority. "You are free, and you are not alone. Stand with me, Lyra." Lyra felt the warmth of his hand on hers, steady and grounding. With his presence, the shadow's whispers seemed weaker, its golden eyes flickering with uncertainty. She straightened, summoning the power that had once terrified her. The shadows around her began to swirl in response, controlled and purposeful this time, no longer chaotic. The first clash came suddenly. The shadow lunged, striking with a speed that made the air hiss. Lyra countered instinctively, sending waves of energy that collided with the intruder. Sparks of gold and silver danced in the night as magic clashed against magic. Kaelin moved with precise, measured force, striking the shadow where its presence was weakest, coordinating with Lyra in perfect sync. The battle was fierce, a blur of movement, energy, and strategy. Lyra's power surged, no longer destructive but focused, guided by her determination and Kalen's calm strength. The shadow roared, a sound that shook the towers and echoed through the mountains, but they did not falter. "You can resist it," Kalen shouted, his voice cutting through the chaos. "It feeds on your fear, Lyra, not on your strength." Lyra's chest heaved. His words struck deep, igniting a flame inside her. She remembered the years of isolation, the fear that had once ruled her life, and the moments of pain and doubt. And then she remembered him, Kalen, standing unwaveringly beside her, offering trust, protection, and something far more profound. The shadows around her tightened into a protective sphere, shielding Kalen as she advanced. The golden eyes of the figure flickered, then dimmed slightly. Lyra focused, drawing upon every ounce of her strength, not just to fight, but to claim her freedom. The power inside her, once feared and dangerous, now flowed like a river, steady and unyielding. "You will not control me," she shouted, voice resonating with power. A surge of energy shot from her hands, pure and bright, and collided with the shadow. For a moment the world seemed to freeze. The shadow trembled, its form wavering, then shattered like glass, dissolving into nothingness. Lyra collapsed to her knees, exhausted, her power slowly ebbing. Kalen was at her side in an instant, lifting her gently, his eyes full of concern and awe. "You did it," he whispered, brushing snow from her hair. "You faced it and you won." Lyra shook her head weakly, her lips curling into a small, tired smile. "We did it," she corrected. "Together," Kalen nodded, his hand resting over hers. The warmth of his presence grounded her, reminding her that she was no longer alone. She had faced the curse, faced the shadow, and emerged stronger, not just because of her power, but because of trust, love, and the bond they shared. The castle, once silent with tension, now seemed alive. Guards and courtiers peeked from the halls, their fear giving way to awe as they witnessed the Omega and the Alpha King standing victorious. Lyra realized with a quiet thrill that she had changed, not just in power, but in spirit. She was no longer the cursed, isolated girl of the Northern Tower. She was herself, strong, free, and capable of love. The days that followed were filled with quiet rebuilding. The Northern lords had retreated, their forces scattered, their threat diminished by the strength and unity of Kalen and his people. The castle's halls, once heavy with whispers and fear, now echoed with cautious celebration and curiosity. Kalen and Lyra moved carefully through the days, their bond deepening with each passing moment. They trained together, explored the castle, and shared quiet conversations beneath the moonlight. Their hands brushed often, sometimes intentionally, sometimes by accident, but each touch carried the weight of trust and growing affection. One evening, as the sun set over the mountains, casting the sky in shades of gold and crimson, Kalen led Lyra to the castle's highest tower. The wind carried the scent of snow and pine, and the world below seemed distant and fragile. "You have faced so much," Kalen said, his voice quiet, full of reverence, "and yet you remain unbroken, stronger than anyone I have ever known." Lyra looked at him, her silver hair glowing in the fading light. "I was not strong alone," she admitted softly. "I could not have done it without you." Kalen took her hands in his, holding them gently. "No," he said, "you did it because you are strong. I only walked beside you." Lyra felt warmth rise in her chest, a lightness she had never known. "Then you will stay with me?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly. "Always," Kalen replied, "through every shadow, every storm, always." They stood together, watching the sun sink below the mountains, the sky painted in fire and frost. The curse was gone, the shadow defeated, and the kingdom safe. But more importantly, they had discovered something neither had expected. A connection deeper than fear, stronger than doubt, and brighter than any darkness. Even as night fell, the castle glowed with torches and candles, a symbol of life, hope, and resilience. Lyra and Kalen moved through the halls hand in hand, no longer bound by fear or legend, but free to shape their future together. Yet as they stood in the moonlit garden later that night, a quiet breeze stirred the leaves, carrying with it a faint whisper. It was not threatening, not dangerous, but a reminder that the world was alive with magic, shadows, and possibility. Lyra smiled faintly, resting her head on Kalen's shoulder. "Whatever comes next," she said softly, "we will face it together." Kalen kissed the top of her head, his hand resting over hers. "Together," he agreed, his voice steady, full of promise. And in that moment, the kingdom of Urindor seemed to hold its breath, the night air alive with magic and quiet anticipation. The curse was broken, the shadows defeated, and the Omega and the Alpha King stood united, stronger, wiser, and ready to face whatever the future might hold. For the first time in her life, Lyra believed in hope, in love, and in the power of choosing one's own destiny. And as she looked at Kaelin, she knew that no darkness, no curse, no shadow could ever separate them again. The castle rested under the stars, silent but watchful, and the wind whispered through the towers like a song of renewal. Lyra and Kaelin, hand in hand, stood together at the battlements, ready to meet the dawn of a new era. The storm was over, but the magic of their bond would shine forever, a light against any darkness that dared to return.